Why have you lived? Why have you suffered? Has it all been only a huge, frightful joke? We must all somehow answer these questions if we are to continue living. Yes, even if we are only to continue dying. Whoever hears this call must give a reply. This passage, written by Gustav Mahler in relation to his Second Symphony, provides us with an essential insight into the psychological orientation that informed his existence and was foundational in the composition of his symphonies. His particular awareness of suffering was rooted in an intense natural sensitivity that rendered him especially vulnerable to the traumas of a childhood dominated by frequent scenes of domestic abuse and the deaths of multiple siblings. These early confrontations with the so-called problem of evil defined key parameters of Mahler's psyche and set him on an obsessive, lifelong pursuit for answers, in a manner that echoes the Eastern religious concept of repeated reincarnations forming a path to enlightenment. All of Mahler's symphonies are about this search for resolution. Written between 1895 and 1896, Mahler's Third Symphony was his most comprehensive expression of the profound, deeply textured pantheism that animated his entire being. As with his previous two symphonies, the form of the third emerged gradually, in much the same way that Rodin described his sculptures emerging from their pre-existence within a rock. Mahler quickly composed 6 movements of modest length during the summer of 1895, but came to realize that the work required a substantial expository movement to open the piece. He removed the song that was to serve as the work's finale, Das himmlische Leben, eventually using it to close his Fourth Symphony. In anticipation of the first movement's addition, he altered the original movement order for reasons of dramatic symmetry, and then spent the entire following summer composing the enormous movement that begins the work. The symphony originally included descriptive titles for each movement, and although Mahler would eventually remove them on the grounds that they could limit the free associative play of listeners' imaginations, they do provide us with information about the various ideas he was considering while composing the piece. The first movement is by far the lengthiest in a symphony that is, notwithstanding its popularity, the longest in the repertoire. It occupies the entire first part of the symphony and is itself divided into 2 large sections, which were originally titled Pan Awakes and Summer Marches In. Mahler's view of nature was far from sentimental. He understood that the inexorable will to exist, common to all forms of life, is nurtured, both metaphorically and materially, in soil death provides, and that the struggle for existence is often brutal. In this movement, Mahler powerfully evokes these phenomena in a funeral march that's punctuated by the scattered appearance and disappearance of disparate, seemingly random elements. As these bits and pieces start bubbling up with greater frequency, they begin to coalesce in a continually expanding tapestry that eventually ushers in summer's ecstatic renewal of life. Although Mahler wrote this movement less than 40 years after Darwin's On the Origin of Species prompted a widespread crisis of faith, one may conclude upon hearing this music that the biologist's discoveries posed no threat to the composer's perceptions of the cosmic order. With the struggle for existence now won, the symphony's second part, comprised of its remaining 5 movements, explores life's joys and dilemmas, the human awareness of mortality, and our search for existential meaning. The exquisite second movement, which was the first music Mahler composed for this symphony, was originally titled What the Flowers in the Meadow Tell Me. It celebrates the simple beauties of nature and includes a paraphrased portion of the excised 7th movement, an indication that that song's evocation of a child's view of heaven was an important element within the symphony's original narrative design. The third movement, once called What the Animals in the Forest Tell Me, is a typically double-edged Mahlerian scherzo that begins with an instrumental version of his song Ablösung im Sommer, or roughly Replacement in Summer. The text of this lied, taken from the folk anthology Des Knaben Wunderhorn, describes how the formerly indispensable call of the cuckoo is replaced, with nature's characteristic ease and indifference, by the song of the nightingale. It is the philosophical entry point for a musical illustration of what Thomas Hobbes called the war of all against all, in which nature dictates a cycle of predation as a condition for living. And yet our human awareness of mortality sets us apart, placing our psyches in conflict with nature's inexorable mechanisms. We mourn the dead, and we fear our own passing. This unique sensibility is captured in this movement in a section inspired by Nikolaus Lenau's poem Der Postillon, in which the rider of a horse-drawn carriage blows his horn to eulogize a fallen comrade. The extended nostalgic solo Mahler wrote to depict the rider's tribute is played off stage on a flugelhorn, a dark-toned descendant of the hunting horn and the bugle. The fourth movement was originally titled What Humanity Tells Me, and it is here that the dilemma of the human condition becomes the symphony's focal point. This setting for alto solo of the poem Mitternachtslied, or Midnight Song, from Nietzsche's philosophical novel Thus Spoke Zarathustra, begins with the primal two-note oscillations and solemn block chords heard in the symphony's opening moments. The text confronts the depth of the world's suffering and our struggle to find its purpose, before finally, in the darkness and quiet of midnight, attaining the revelation that the desire to live and to experience joy is ultimately eternal. The dark hues of the fourth movement are dispelled with the launching of the fifth, a brilliantly scored setting of the folk poem Es sungen drei Engel, or Three Angels Sang a Sweet Song, from Mahler's beloved Des Knaben Wunderhorn, in which women's and boys' choirs join the alto soloist. Atmospherically, this movement, which Mahler had called What the Angels Tell Me, is its predecessor's opposite twin. Its character is prevailingly airy and elevated, and its aspirational meaning is confirmed by the return of passages from the original finale and that music's association with a child's vision of heaven. To close this immense symphony, Mahler made the extraordinary choice to compose a slow movement. Originally titled What Love Tells Me, this noble, often hymn-like finale is the glorious musical and poetic summation of all that has come before it. Here, the search for the meaning of our suffering achieves resolution in our ability to love deeply and fully, to feel, express, and act upon the empathy that we can only come to understand most profoundly through the experience of our own pain. This creative impulse to nurture each other and the world around us can, through our actions and example, maintain its resonance and influence long after we've passed, a path that becomes inspiringly clear as we listen to the final transcendent moments of this powerfully life-affirming work.